Every town has someone folks don't question. Not because they're feared, but because they're owed. In Millage, that man sat quietly in the corner booth with a patch on his shoulder and silence in his mouth. At 6:42 sharp, the cafe door gave a soft jingle as Hal Mercer stepped inside. He moved like the morning belonged to him, slow, certain, unbothered by time. The air hung thick with syrup and sizzle, the kind of heat that clung to your coat and whispered welcome. He didn't scan the room. He didn't need to. His booth, far left by the window, was always open, like the town itself knew better than to occupy his space. Darlene caught his arrival mid-pour. "Mornin', sweet soul," she called, already pouring black coffee into his mug before he'd spoken a word. Hal nodded once, wordless. He slid into his usual spot, laying a battered leather notebook beside the ketchup bottle, and folded his coat so the corner patch, worn, triangle-shaped, dulled with time, remained just visible. His hands moved with practiced ease, shaking out the morning paper and smoothing it like a map he could already recite. He didn't read headlines. He remembered things: the booth, the cup, the sunlight edging across the table. This was his clock. No one in Millage asked where Hal came from. They didn't dare. They just knew he showed up. Same seat, same silence, same pancakes. Dry, no butter, 2 strips of bacon so crisp they snapped. And always 3 folded dollars tucked beneath the saucer before breakfast even arrived. The bell rang again, sharper this time. A gust of cold wind, a slap of energy. Brandon Hale stormed in at 6:47 like he owned the minute. "Big week, people," he shouted, folders flapping in one hand like wings. He breezed past 2 regulars and dropped his mess onto the counter with a thump. "Triple shot today, Darlene. We're drowning in Veterans Day chaos." She didn't flinch. "Maybe start with a splash of manners." Brandon chuckled, already spinning toward the booths. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on Hal. "Well, look who's still holding court," he muttered. Loud enough to be heard. Not loud enough to be brave. Darlene moved through the diner with Hal's plate in her hands, setting it down with the care folks reserve for something sacred. "That man pulled my boy out from under a runaway truck when he was 8. Broke his wrist catching him. Didn't even stay to ice it. Just left cash and walked home." Brandon blinked, caught mid-scoff. "Didn't know that." "Lot of things you don't," she replied, already walking away. Brandon approached Hal's booth, arms folded, voice dipped in sarcasm. "Still dragging that antique around?" he asked, motioning toward the coat. The patch, once vivid blue, now whispered of something earned, not worn. Hal turned a page. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. Brandon leaned in, smirking. "Better hope it survives the parade." Behind the counter, Darlene paused. Her eyes met Hal's. The paper froze in his hands. Stillness flooded the diner. Brandon shifted, cleared his throat, tapped twice on the formica. "Anyway, big week. Enjoy the rituals." The bell jangled again, softer this time, as the door sighed shut behind him. Outside, the sun finally breached the fogged windows. Its rays spilled across the booth, highlighting brass napkin holders and catching the corner of that old shoulder patch. Just enough for it to glint like something remembered. Hal Mercer didn't need thanks, and the benches at Mosswood never needed instructions on who wiped them down. Mosswood Park woke slowly, still cradled in mist. Gravel curled through bronze memorials and groves of faded trees. Among the silence, a gloved hand moved with gentle purpose. Hal Mercer brushing leaves from the curve of Bench 7, the only one not replaced by modern plastic. His canvas tote rested at his side, packed with soft cloths, a dented thermos, and a miniature flag still stiff from its plastic sleeve. He kneeled, not easily, lowering himself before a weathered plaque like he was praying. "Lieutenant Thomas Callahan." Hal wiped away the dew with a folded handkerchief, then reset the fallen marigold upright in its vase. He adjusted the tiny flag, making sure it stood at a perfect angle. His breath came slow, a visible trail in the cold air. Crunch. Footsteps behind him, fast and clipped. "Sir, this area's restricted. City's marking the layouts," called Brandon Hale, emerging from the fog like a warning. His clipboard hugged to his chest like a badge. Hal didn't answer. He stood with care, nodding once toward the plaque. His eyes didn't show resistance, only knowledge older than the rule. We've got seating zones, stage boundaries, audio lines. Insurance won't clear us till setup's done, Brandon continued. No volunteers unless they're signed on. Hal didn't move toward him. Instead, he pulled a small wooden sign from his tote. Handwritten block letters, uneven but deliberate. Remember them. He pressed it gently into the damp soil near the walkway. Brandon squinted. Did you make that? A voice cut in from the hedges. He makes one every year. Tina Alvarez stepped into view, bundled in a jacket far too big, gloves shoved into her back pocket. Her boots were damp from the grass. And every year I leave it exactly where he puts it. Brandon fumbled. It's just not standard. Tina raised an eyebrow. Neither was the man at honors. He shifted. Still, city signage. So print one, she muttered, brushing past him toward the bins. Hal had already moved on. Another bench, another name. Sergeant Diane Luring, 1960 to 1989. Pine needles clung to the grooves in her plaque. Hal brushed them aside with slow care, the cuff of his coat rising slightly as he leaned in. The triangle patch on his shoulder, faded and threadbare, caught the faintest hint of light. From nearby, Mr. Ogden raised a trembling salute. His scarf flapped slightly as he sipped from a steaming paper cup. He's been doing this since my twins were toddlers, Tina said quietly. Never missed a year. Never once asked for thanks. Brandon folded his arms. Still wearing that thing? He said louder, nodding at Hal's coat. Tina didn't respond, but her jaw tensed. It's just fabric, Brandon added, scribbling something on his sheet. Hal paused mid-motion. He glanced at the corner of his sleeve, then tugged the collar higher with a slow, practiced hand, like he'd done it in battle, not protest. He stood, nodded once to Ogden, and turned toward the edge of the park. No goodbyes, just distance. Brandon looked down at the small wooden sign, its letters uneven but bold. He bent, picked it up, holding it in both hands. For a moment, he just stared. You really don't know, Tina said beside him. Know what? Brandon asked, confused. Down the hill, folding chairs creaked as people rose. Middle schoolers stood beside rows of handmade flags, watching the brass band begin to play. Everyone stood, except the man the general was now walking toward. Boot heels squared in rigid formation. Rifle barrels glinted against a sky that couldn't decide between gray and blue. On Thursday, November 9th, the town of Milledge observed Veterans Day the only way it knew how. Small, heartfelt, and just shy of precise. Brandon Hale stood center stage, gripping the mic stand like a lifeline. His notes fluttered between trembling fingers, index cards growing damp with nervous sweat. His tan blazer was too thin for the weather and too fresh to earn trust. He'd already stumbled, called Lieutenant Jubinski by the wrong name, and now every word felt like a hurdle. Please welcome, he said, voice cracking, our guest of honor, retired General Ayla Torrance, decorated veteran of the 101st Airborne, recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Legion of Merit. Polite applause rippled through the park. Veterans in dress hats, spouses holding gloved hands, school teachers, students, city workers, teenagers with their hoodies pulled half up under navy cardigans. From the shaded path, the general emerged, coat buttoned to the collar, medals stitched across her chest like thunder. Her silver braid swept neatly down her back, her gait measured, her expression unreadable. She climbed the riser steps with ease, nodded once to Brandon, then halted mid-stride. Her eyes locked onto something in the distance, a bench under the old oak. There sat Hal Mercer, hands folded atop a wooden cane no one remembered from yesterday. His coat zipped halfway, collar bent slightly, triangle patch peeking from beneath his arms like a memory refusing to stay buried. His head dipped, not in defiance, but in quiet reverence. The general stepped down from the platform. The crowd tensed. Musicians hesitated mid-note. Microphone cables swayed in the breeze, but the wind itself seemed to hush. Only the flag above them moved. One quick snap, then stillness. She crossed the lawn slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached him, she stopped, brought her hand to her brow, and delivered a salute so sharp it silenced everything. A murmur rippled. Someone gasped. A teacher dropped her program. A child pointed and whispered, "That's Mr. Hal." Brandon stood frozen on stage, his voice lost. One of his cards slipped from his grip, fluttering to the grass like a forgotten thought. The general held her salute longer than any manual required. Then, lowering her hand, she said with steady clarity, "That patch was issued to 5. Only one remains." A hush spread outward, echoing from person to person like a wave folding in on itself. Hal didn't rise. At first, he simply lifted his eyes. Then slowly, as if lifting the weight of decades, he stood and returned the salute. No flair, no speech. The trumpet began, a lone horn playing taps. By morning, the booth at Nell's was empty for the first time in years. But something remained. A jacket, folded neatly where the pancakes once sat. The patch faced up. Sunlight streamed through the fogged window, catching the threads just enough to make them shine. Next to it, a paper receipt. Blank, but for a timestamp and a name written in slow, deliberate penmanship. Hal Mercer. Later that day, Brandon stepped across Maple and Pine, shoulders hunched against a wet wind. The bell above the diner chimed with its usual charm, but even the air inside felt paused, like the walls themselves were listening. He didn't glance around. His eyes went straight to the booth. No one sat there. The napkin holder hadn't moved. The seat cushion lay untouched. But the jacket remained. He approached slowly, resting his hand beside the receipt, as if asking permission from a man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Brandon sat across from the jacket like a man entering someone else's memory. His eyes followed the folds in the fabric, worn thin at the elbows, cuffs softened by time. Beside the receipt, just beneath its edge, lay a neatly folded napkin. He lifted it carefully. 5 words written in looping black ink. Some honors don't need ceremony. He exhaled and leaned back, arms crossed. He didn't touch the coat. Darlene arrived without fanfare, 2 mugs in her hands. She set one down gently, already filled. "Didn't think I'd see you this early," she said, sitting across from him. Brandon shook his head. He didn't say anything? She stirred her coffee, eyes distant. "Just asked if your booth was open." He nodded once. "That's all?" She looked up. That was always enough for him. A pause settled between them. Brandon's fingers hovered near the napkin. "You said he saved your son." Darlene's voice softened. "Norman was little. Ran across Miller Street chasing a ball. Car came out of nowhere. Hal caught him mid-stride. Took the hit on his wrist. Never called it brave. Just said it'd bruise." Brandon glanced down at the jacket again. "And you never told anyone?" "Wasn't my truth to share." The bell rang gently behind them. Tina Alvarez stepped inside, brushing rain from her collar. She walked straight to the booth and slid in beside Darlene without a word. "Knew I'd find you both here," she said. "Guess I've got my piece too." Brandon gestured to the table. "Go ahead." She folded her hands. 2 years ago, December storm knocked out power at the cemetery. Crews weren't coming till Monday, but Saturday morning every path was cleared. Lamps rewired, headstones wiped clean. Darlene smiled knowingly. "I found a receipt later," Tina added. "Signed H. Mercer, night maintenance. Paid in full." Brandon stared at the patch again. He never stopped. "No," Tina said. "He just didn't need anyone watching." Behind the counter, the radio shifted to an old swing ballad. Heads lifted. A few smiled. Some tapped along. The music reached into corners where Hal's silence once lived. Brandon rose slowly. He reached for the jacket, lifting it with both hands like it could crumble in his grip. He brushed a few crumbs from the seat, then held the coat against his chest. From across the cafe, a young boy waved shyly. Denim jacket, 2 flag pins, a quiet smile. Norman Jr. Brandon blinked, then nodded back, his throat tight. "I need to know who he was." Millage Library didn't have internet terminals, but it had Maggie, and Maggie was better. The bell over the library door gave a dry squeak as Brandon stepped into the stone-walled warmth. The smell of paper and polish greeted him like a whispered welcome. Behind the front desk sat Maggie, half-finished crossword at her elbow. Without looking up, she said, "Figured you'd be by." Brandon approached slowly. "How'd you—" "Man leaves a coat and a message," she said. "Only question was who'd show up first." Brandon watched Maggie scan the reels like she was reading stories blindfolded. Her fingers tapped at the controls, moving the film slowly, steadily, as if drawing memories through static. "I'm looking for anything on Hal Mercer," he said, keeping his voice low. "Military records, old clippings, whatever's survived." Maggie smiled without turning. "I went to school with his sister. Family stayed quiet. Too quiet, maybe." She stood with the grace of someone who knew exactly where history slept. "You won't find him online, but Drawer 6B remembers." She led him down a dim corridor. Flyers from old reading campaigns curled at the corners on the walls. Inside the archive room, light from high windows painted diagonal stripes across cabinets thick with dust. Maggie powered on the microfilm reader and fed in a reel. "Start with 1972. Southeast Asia. Look for blackout ops. A journalist named Winslow used to write about soldiers who never made it home." Brandon leaned into the machine's glow, scrolling slow. The clicks became rhythm, the blue haze a meditation. Somewhere around page 50, he stopped. "Here." Maggie leaned in. The headline read, "5 pulled from Nightfall evacuation. Hero not named." Beneath, a short paragraph. Survivors had described a lone airman improvising a rescue after their pilot was lost. The man had carried 2 wounded over miles of hostile terrain, under moonless skies. No name was provided, only a mention of a triangle patch never logged in official records. Maggie let out a slow whistle. "That's him." Brandon stared at the screen. "Why didn't anyone follow up?" "They did," she said. "He just stopped answering the knock." Later that afternoon, Brandon traced an address to a rental off Chestnut Street. A squat house sat behind a rusted gate, its porch sagging like a question left too long. The mailbox was empty, the curtains drawn. He knocked anyway. No answer. He turned to leave. "You looking for Hal?" The voice came from next door. An older man leaned against his railing, coat buttoned to the chin, cane tapping lightly on the wood. "Yeah, Brandon Hale. I work with the city." The man nodded. "Thomas. I've known Hal since '64. He won't be back today." Brandon stepped closer. "You know where he is?" Thomas tapped the cane again. "Sunday, 3 o'clock, Hillrest Cemetery, Veterans Section." Brandon hesitated. "Every Sunday?" Thomas nodded. "Every name he remembers, rain or shine." As Brandon turned, Thomas added, "He's not hiding. He just doesn't need to be found." That night, Brandon sat at his kitchen table, flipping pages in his calendar. He circled the coming Sunday in firm strokes. He wouldn't let Hal walk alone again. At exactly 3 p.m., Hal stood jacketless beneath the oak. His back was straight, his hands clasped behind him. A single white flower rested against his leg. Wind stirred the leaves around the headstones, slow and soundless. He didn't speak. Brandon approached from the path. No greeting, no announcement, just presence. And Hal didn't turn. Not yet. They stood without speaking. Hal's fingers closed loosely around a single white bloom. Brandon mirrored the posture, both of them facing the same headstone. For a while, there was only wind and the hush of trees shedding late autumn leaves. Then Hal stepped forward and lowered his flower to the base of the marker. Brandon followed. Their 2 stems leaned into one another, white petals side by side against weather-worn stone. "He was 23, Hal said finally. Laughed like static breaking. Called me Cap even though I wasn't." His voice carried no performance, just memory. "Kept a photo in his helmet. I always meant to ask who she was." He didn't finish the sentence. Brandon stayed silent. "I come because I still can," Hal said. He turned slightly, eyes meeting Brandon's. "Why are you here?" Brandon answered quietly. Because I should have listened when he was still quiet. Hal didn't nod. But he didn't leave either. That evening, the high school auditorium buzzed with restless energy. Students shifted in their chairs, plastic creaking in nervous waves. Teachers lined the back, parents filled the aisles. On stage, a banner read, "Career Day, Voices Who Serve." Off stage, Hal stood without a name tag. His charcoal sweater hung loose across his frame, his hands folded behind his back. Brandon joined him, holding a folded letter. "You sure?" he asked. "One request," Hal said. "No applause," Brandon smiled. Hal stepped to the microphone. A few teens whispered. Then the room fell still. "They asked me to speak about service," he began. His voice was clear, firm. "It doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it means showing up when no one's watching." A pause. "When I was 19, I carried a man 3 miles through jungle. He couldn't walk. Told me, 'Don't stop. Keep going.' I listened." Hal looked across the crowd. Students who'd never felt that weight, not yet. "You'll be told to speak out. Sometimes you should. Other times, shut up and carry. No noise, no confusion, only understanding." Brandon unfolded the letter. "From General Torrance," he read. "The best heroes don't speak loudly. They notice, they act, they expect nothing. Hal Mercer reminds us what service really means." Near the back, a girl wiped her eyes. A boy in ROTC gear sat taller. A hand went up, a boy with glasses and a notebook. "What did the patch mean?" he asked. Hal considered, then replied, "It meant I went where others wouldn't." The room held its breath, no clapping, no cheering, just silence that understood its purpose. Days later, Brandon returned to the library. Maggie met him with a key and a smile. "North display case," she said. Inside the glass, under soft lighting, the jacket rested, neatly folded. The patch now faced forward, illuminated by a single bulb. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "He reminded us." Next to Brandon, Norman Jr. tugged at his sleeve. "Can I wear one like his someday?" Brandon knelt beside him. "Only if you earn it the same way. Quiet, steady." Hal never asked for applause. Maybe that's why his silence spoke louder than any anthem. Sometimes the things we call ordinary, an old jacket, a quiet booth, a man walking alone, carry more truth than all the speeches in the world, because real worth doesn't demand attention. It just shows up, again and again.